Welcome into Finish Strong. I'm Dan Wheeler, joined by my co-hosts, Terry and Brian. And guys, I'm really excited about this one tonight because our special guest has been a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine for 37 years. We worked together on air at companies called CVN and then QVC, which most people have heard of QVC. And she just recently retired. But guys, you've both met Mary Beth, and so you've had a taste of her kindness, her sweetness, and her good heart.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Delightful lady. I'm really excited about this. I was seeing some of the social media comments and interviews upon her retirement, and it was like, wow, she's like a sister to God or something. It's right up there.
She's up there.
That's good. Yeah. And I've seen Mary Beth, of course, at the studio many times with you, Dan, and at your house. Yeah. She'd stop by, and I just remember the party that we went to. I think it was for one of her kids, and they had a couple cameras, but nobody recorded. You and I picked up a camera each, and we did the recordings of it. It was such a good time. Yeah, it was great. Well, that's where I met Mark, too, her husband, for the first time.
Yeah, he's a great guy, too. Well, let's bring her on. She looks too young to be a legend, but she is a legend in the television shopping industry.
All right.
My pleasure. Mary Beth, welcome to Finish Strong.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Brian. This is so exciting. I'm really, really happy to do this.
We're glad to have you here. And, of course, you've retired, but it doesn't quite feel like retirement yet, does it?
Not yet. It's only been 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So, and we went on vacation the first week. I was sick in bed the whole second week.
Oh, no.
I think, honestly, I was very worn down. It doesn't really surprise me that I came down sick. And then last week, I finally felt good and got a little taste of what retirement is like.
Yeah. Well, our timing is good. Are we your first interview post-retirement? All right.
You are. First and most important.
Oh,
I like it.
Thank you. We like that too. Well, your retirement party was amazing, and you deserved all the kind words that were spoken. And I was so impressed with you and Mark. You both gave wonderful testimonies, and that had to be emotional for you.
It really was. You know, this was the first time I really kind of put together a big party like that. I just really haven't since we were married. And by the way, it'll be 42 years tomorrow.
Yay. Congratulations.
Hey, good for you.
Yeah, happy anniversary.
So the fact is that I realized there was two things that I wanted to accomplish at that party. I didn't want it about me, really. It was my retirement party, but it was really to thank so many people that have been a part of my life and my career. And, you know, I mean, certainly I didn't do this on my own. It takes a village. And at the same time, I wanted to really, not that it was any surprise to the people who I work with that I'm a Christian, but I wanted to make sure that they walked away once again saying, she's different because she knows the Lord. And I feel like we were able to accomplish that. So that was exciting.
Yeah, you definitely did. Great. You said everything you are and all the kind words. It's only because of Jesus Christ. I was so impressed with that. And Mark, he blew me away. No one's ever heard Mark speak. And he said, I've got the microphone now. And he did a beautiful job.
You know, what's funny is that I really didn't know at all what he was going to say. And in fact, all I asked him to do was pray. I told him, I said, after I introduce the whole family, then I'm just going to ask you to come up on the platform and pray. Yeah. And he said, okay, that sounds fine. And then he gets up there and his first words are, I finally have the microphone after 38 years. But he proceeded to be phenomenal. I mean, everything from funny things to crazy stories that have happened over the 38 years. And then he launched into what he really wanted to get across was these are all people in this room that have a lot to be grateful for. Mm-hmm. And they need to be grateful to the Lord for what they
Yes.
have. And
Yes.
most of them didn't know the Lord, but he talked about Moses and took us back just to being so grateful for what you have. And I think it really spoke to a lot of people. And then, of course, he prayed.
Yeah, he did a phenomenal job. I was really impressed. And you and I go back to Minneapolis, Minnesota days with CVN. We've been close friends. We lived in the same neighborhood for a while out in the Westchester area, went to the same church, watched our kids grow up. I worked for your son to help try and get him elected, and we did. But, I'll never forget meeting you the first day at CVN in Minneapolis. Mary Beth was the first host I worked with. You had to start out as a co-host. So I'm basically watching her and learning from her. And, a little ways in the show, she had me sell a stereo. And I'll never forget, we sold it out and we went to a break and you came up to me and said, "Hey, you're pretty good. I think you're going to do pretty good here." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Well, I almost made 30 years, but you far outdistanced me, 38. And what impressed me too, and guys, you probably know this if you read Hurricane of Love, the day my dad died, who showed up at my door? Mark and Mary Beth just to give us hugs. And when Beth passed away, she was there and was just a great friend even through Beth's sickness. One day I come into the kitchen, Beth was on at the end there. And I walk out, Mary Beth's just loading my refrigerator up with food.
I just walked in. I didn't even knock. I just came in the garage door.
And then you bought so many copies of my book. I can't thank you enough. You bought like 40 copies, gave them to the whole TV sales department at QVC. But so I want to ask you,
Mary Beth, he sold 50 now.
Mary Beth, these guys think they're so funny.
That is funny.
But anyways,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. So you told me like QVC can't let you go. They've kind of given you a part-time job, right?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting because originally it was January of 2024 that I told my boss, Joe, I said, I really feel that I need to retire this year. And that was in 2024. And I said, in fact, I'm turning 65 in August of 2024. So I said, I would like to retire when I turn 65. I can finally get Medicare.
Yeah.
And he said, okay. Because I said, well, I'm giving you 8 months notice,
Right.
And so that's great. He was like, we're going to miss you so much, but we understand. So then about April or May, it was like late April, early May, we started realizing that there was one host was going to go out on maternity leave, another 2 female hosts, one was getting married and wanted to go off and be with her husband. And, another one wanted to go into ministry actually. And so they said, we can't do without 4 hosts going into fourth quarter. So could you stay a little bit longer? And our contracts go March to March. And so at that point I said, you know what, I'll just hang out with, I'll stay with QVC till March of 2025. And then that will make more sense for a break. And so that's what I ended up doing. So I told them in January of 2024, and I never left till March of 2025.
That's funny.
But the fact is now I just found out that they are going to keep me on as a part-time employee on call, but it's not on call for on air. I really feel like I'm done from on air.
Yeah.
And so but during those, actually the last 25 years, I've been part of training new hosts and kind of staying with them for about 2 years while they're getting their feet wet and getting on their feet. And so they're going to continue to use me in the training phase.
That's great.
That's
great.
That's
Yeah.
excellent. Yeah. Well, you ended up at QVC. That was where your final stop. But I remember you being Mrs. Minnesota, if I remember right.
That's right.
Was that before you started in television?
No, it wasn't. In fact, I was at CVN, Cable Value Network in Minneapolis, when I actually won that title. And so it was kind of interesting because when you win the title, obviously you have that title for 1 year before you pass the crown to the next woman. And it was during that year that QVC bought CVN, told us we
Oh,
were
yeah.
all out of a job in 30 days. And
Hmm.
then they offered me, we all had to interview, etc. They offered me a job to go out to Pennsylvania. And I thought, how can I go to Pennsylvania while I'm Mrs. Minnesota? That's what it
Mm,
was. But
yeah.
the pageant people said, don't worry, it's if we need you for something specific, we'll bring you back. And so that's actually what ended up happening. I basically had won in like June or July of the year before. And then I went to QVC in Pennsylvania in March. So then I came back in June, just a couple months later, and crowned the next girl. But it all happened during that year. It was a big year. It was a
Yeah.
busy
Yes.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where
Could
did you
you?
get your start in TV then?
Actually started right out of college. I actually went to college to be a teacher, an elementary education teacher. And
Hmm.
the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I started feeling the Lord was kind of tugging on me to go into television news. And
Hmm.
when I told my education professor, he was like, "No way, we have to have you. You're a born teacher." And I said, well, I feel the Lord, it was a Christian college, so he can't argue with me. But anyway,
Right,
I
right,
said,
right.
I felt the Lord telling me to go more into television. So literally my last year, my senior year, I did an internship with Channel 11, which was an NBC station in
What town was
Minneapolis,
that? Oh, Minneapolis. Okay.
KARE
Okay.
TV. And by the time I actually finished that internship, I had my VHS tape ready to roll with anchoring and reporting, and I
Yep.
worked with their talk show, etc. And within 2 weeks, I had a job as an anchor woman. This is going to take you back a ways, the first anchor woman ever in Eau Claire, Wisconsin.
Really?
Oh,
They
wow.
had all three channels, but they had
Okay.
only ever had men on the
Oh,
anchor desks.
you're
And
a ceiling breaker. You broke the
yeah, I
ceiling.
mean, it's like pioneering. So this ABC station in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which wasn't a real big market, but
Mhm.
nevertheless,
Hey, it's where we start.
they
Yeah.
Yeah.
hired me. And, that never happens. You don't get hired
Right.
as an anchor woman straight out of college.
Yeah.
You
Right.
get hired as a reporter. You
Right.
start at the bottom and work your way up. But I got, fortunate, blessed, however you want to talk about it, is that I
Yeah.
actually got to start as an anchor. But it was a small
Yeah.
enough station that I was reporting as well, of course.
Yeah.
Brian and I started the same TV station, not at the same time, but in Springfield,
Yeah.
Missouri. And
Yeah.
I started out writing copy in the newsroom, but the sports anchor was terrible. He was a former football player and he couldn't read. And the owner came up and said, you know a lot about sports. You want to try? And I go, yes, sir. And so I got on the air as a sportscaster there within
Wow.
like 2 or 3, probably 2 months.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, you gotta
Got to start
take it once.
somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
And I watch television too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know how to use a remote, Terry?
I'm figuring it
Okay.
out slowly.
Well, Mary Beth, I think your was it elementary school that you were studying to
Yeah.
go? See,
Mhm.
it was perfect. You had Dan, just everything just fit right in place.
There
Okay,
you
guys,
go.
is this whole show going to be bashing? It's a good thing
But,
we're good friends. We're
you're
good
so
friends.
right, Brian. You know how one of the things that's so wonderful about knowing the Lord for so long is that you look back and you know exactly, not always exactly, but you see how the Lord puts your life
Yeah.
together
Mhm.
one step at a time.
It
And,
does.
from being in pageants, even in high school, to learn the poise for on camera. Never even thought once I was going to be on camera when I was in high school. Then I
Yeah.
go to college to be a teacher. And yet, so much of what I've done for the last 38 years is teaching. It's teaching the
Mhm.
customer about
Right.
the product, and it's
Right.
teaching the hosts or the brand new host how to be a host. And there's definitely a teacher in me, and yet the Lord wanted to take whatever abilities he'd given me and put me in a different situation that
Yeah.
gave me a much larger platform.
Yeah.
And
That's wonderful.
all those times when you're actually going through those different steps, you don't realize exactly what the Lord has for you. You're just following and obeying. And it's so cool to look back and see it
Yeah.
all and how it's
Yeah.
unfolded.
It's funny. We just did a podcast about finding God's will, and so much of it is that when you give the Lord what you have and serve Him, He'll get you where He needs you to be.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. What was CVN your first shopping channel that you worked with?
Yes, that was the first shopping channel. When I got the job in television news, I was there 3 years, but
Oh,
during
wow.
that time in Eau Claire, Wisconsin is when I met Mark. And that's a whole nother story. But anyway, we fell in love and decided to get married. And then from there, we went to the other side of Wisconsin because he was going to school for band instrument repair. And he had been in the Marine Corps as a trombone player in one of the Marine Corps bands. And so he wanted to repair instruments. So I basically left television news to go with him so he could get trained for his band instrument repair. And from there, the Lord took us to Canada, to Toronto, Canada for 3 years. So I was out of television for about 3.5 years.
Now, I never knew that, and I've known
Yeah.
you for years. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we decided that the Lord was really telling us to go back to Minneapolis from Canada. We'd been in Canada 3 years. It was so expensive up there, and we were missing our families and all. We were 26 years old at that point. And so we went back to Minneapolis for his job because then he had a job as a band instrument repairman at Schmidt Music, it was called, in Minneapolis. And it was at that point I was going to get back into news and nobody was hiring. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I had a friend who was a PR person in Minneapolis. And I just happened to be talking to her and telling her I was looking for a television job. And she said, they're starting up a shopping channel in Minneapolis. Have you ever heard of that? I said, no, I have no clue what that's about. And so we talked. She sent me to the auditions and I got hired on the spot. And that was 38 years ago.
Wow.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So then you made the jump to QVC. Could you ever have imagined how big that would become? And what do you attribute the success to of QVC? It's been phenomenal, hasn't it?
Yeah. It was interesting because when QVC bought CVN was big.
Right.
And QVC
We were
was
bigger
small.
than QVC. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like, I always say it was like the little fish that ate the whale. And you never imagine that that's going to, be great over a period of time. But when they told us we were losing our jobs in 30 days, basically, right away, there's 30 of us who are all in television looking for television jobs in Minneapolis. And nobody was hiring then either. And so when QVC offered me a job to go out to the East Coast, it was like the last place I wanted to go because we were finally back in Minnesota with our families. We had just had our first baby. But it's like, once again, you trying to follow the Lord's leading. And it was interesting because QVC flew me out to Westchester, Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia twice for interviews. And I just couldn't decide. And I finally said to them, I can't make this decision without my husband because we decide these things together. And so a third time they flew me out and brought Mark this time.
Wow.
And we did some interviews. We looked around at the area. And I remember we got back on the plane to fly back to Minneapolis. And I was really fighting it. I was just like, I don't want to move to the East Coast. And he said, honey, I really feel like the Lord's telling us to go. And it doesn't have to be forever. He said, maybe we go out there for a year or two. And we've already been to Canada. We've been away from our families. We can do this, And so we said yes. And even then, I thought maybe a year or two, then we'll move back to Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Never happened.
Yeah. Well, Mark is a wonderful guy. You just don't want to play golf with him, guys, because he can golf. I mean, he's a golfer, but he's a sweetheart of a guy. Terry asked you kind of what you thought the key to the success was, and there were so many people, the buyers, the planners. Like you said, it takes a village, and if you walk into the place, man, there's just offices everywhere, and it takes everybody. But we had a philosophy. Jack always said it was our secret sauce, and that was the backyard fence. Talking to your neighbor across the backyard. So I think the hosts had something to do with it, a little bit.
We were the ones on camera, so everything that happened wrong was all our fault.
That's right. Yeah. You got the quick pat on the back when you blew the goal away, but when it went wrong, you get the call in the morning. What happened?
Exactly. But
maybe they didn't want the product.
I do think that a lot of the secret to the success at QVC was that it wasn't hard sell. When we were at CVN, both Dan and me, there was a lot of hard sell to it, or fairly hard sell. Yeah. I feel like we were probably two of the least hard sell people at CVN. And I think it's one of the reasons why we both ended up at QVC. But QVC was much more about the relationship between QVC and the host and the customer. And they really did have the right blend put together. And they also wanted to make sure they brought in really good products. Now, certainly over the period of years, the quality got much better. But I also think that it was really the recipe for success that QVC had. It was more of a soft sell. It was more about telling instead of selling. And it was, not pushing. And I think that was a big part of it. It's gotten a little more hard sell over the last few years. But I think that's the reason for the success, truly.
Right. I always enjoyed it because whenever I'd meet people, a lot of times they'd pair you and me. They'd say, I knew that you were a Christian and that Mary Beth is a Christian. And they'd always ask me, is she as sweet off camera as she is on? And I said, listen, we are on camera way too much to be anybody else. She is exactly the way she is on camera, off camera. But I always considered it a compliment.
Oh, I think so too. I'll tell you a funny little story. When we were up in Canada and I couldn't really work that much, it was more about Mark's job. I took an acting class because I thought, well, maybe I'd be a good actress. I took this acting class for 12 weeks. At the end of the 12 weeks, the instructor said to me, he goes, Mary Beth, don't take this personally, but you're a terrible actress. He said, you would be much better off just being yourself. Find a television job where you can be yourself.
Yeah, that's
that was
great.
Long before I ever knew a shopping channel existed.
I was the same way. Yeah. When I was hosting that shopping show in Chicago, I was taking an acting class and doing some work with an agent. But when I finally got to an audition and I walked up there and they said, sell this ladder. And I said, what do you mean sell the ladder? Is there a script? They said, no. I said, is it a commercial? They said, no. I said, great, roll it. I can be myself. I was the same way. But you know what? If you're acting on QVC, people know. They can tell.
That's so true.
You got to be genuine. And of course, your faith brings that out in you, especially. And I know the pressures of live television as a producer director. I produced many live shows and I pulled all this hair out. And I did like 24 hours with Dan when he was producing one time.
That's
Mine keeps getting shorter.
We produced the live coverage of Washington for Jesus one year when I was still producing and I had my own company before the whole home shopping. And Brian was my main director. And we had directors from CVN, PTL, TBN. But Brian was the best of the best. So
wow.
Anyway.
I'll
It's
pay
a
you
lot
later.
of hard work. People don't realize how much work goes into it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, but I know that my faith got me through a lot of that. And how did your faith help you survive live television, especially with first-time guests that you have to walk through?
Yeah. First time guests are a little bit more difficult because they're nervous. And, how do you get them to relax and just kind of, I mean, they're the experts. They know everything about the product, but how do you get that to come out? And
to not look at the camera and freak out in those big studios. Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of it too does go back to my faith, because when you have the Lord inside you, there's a warmth that you just show to other people.
Yeah.
And I remember times when I would be standing next to somebody who was brand new and they would be so nervous. And I would just look at them. I'd kind of get their eye and I'd say, this is before the camera came to us. I'd say, we're just friends. Just talk to me as your friend. And they would kind of like take okay, it was just kind of like, tell me about this product. Don't sell it. Just tell me.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of it. It was interesting because a lot of times people that don't really even know me, they would say, there's something different about you. Or, there's just a warmth about you, or different things and I knew immediately that was Jesus in me.
Right.
They were seeing Jesus in me.
Right.
And that thrilled me.
That's neat.
Oh, that's so neat.
Mary Beth, let me ask, we don't get too many ladies on our show, so this is a great privilege, and we have a number of ladies that listen and follow us. Let me ask you, as a career/mother, tell me about the balance. We have a lot of ladies that listen, and they may be in the throes of trying to balance their career with being a mother and raising them as they need to be raised. Can you give any advice there?
It's one of the hardest things to do. There's no doubts about it. I always wanted to be a mom. I always wanted to have kids. I came from a large family of 6 kids. My husband came from a family of 7 kids. So we always knew we wanted a family. And we knew that, the Lord put us in Westchester, Pennsylvania because of QVC. That's where he wanted me. So the first 2 children, we just really tried to look for Christian women who had daycares in their homes, so that they were well taken care of. They weren't just in some, daycare or whatever. The first thing we did was find a church when we got to Westchester, find a church. And then in that church, we found somebody who was a wonderful Christian woman. And so our first son, Eric, went to her house when I would be working. Now, the other thing too, though, is that a lot of times in the early part, I was working overnights. And so I would be able to work overnight, and then I would be able to be home with Eric during the day. But then as I started to get better as a host and work more daytime, then we had to, do a little bit more of the daycare. What happened was then we had the second one. But Mark and I always worked as a team as best we could. And he was repairing instruments for a store, but then he started repairing the band instruments in our home, in our basement. And so once again, a lot of times he was taking care of the 2 boys while I was at work. And then during the night while I was sleeping and the kids were sleeping, half of that night he'd be up working on the instruments. And so it was just a matter of trying to figure out who sleeps when and all that. It's not that's live TV. And but then by the 3rd boy, Mark said, he goes, you know what? I think the Lord wants me to just be a stay-at-home dad. And, I'll tell you, it takes a very humble, confident man to do that.
Yes,
And to
I agree.
say that. and
Yeah.
to step back from their career and what they love to do and say, you know what? It's so important that we raise these boys to be Christian men. And so that's when he started staying home. And he actually continued to stay home for the rest of the time, all these
Yeah.
years.
That's neat. That's neat.
Mhm.
Well, let me give you 3 categories. I want you to reflect back. I want you to give me your worst moments in television.
Or one of them. She doesn't have a lot of them.
No. And you can pick and choose either the worst moment, the best moment, or your favorite guest. Give us just a highlight there.
Wow, it's hard to, but I'll say one of the worst, one of the best. And the last one was what? What was the last one?
Your
Favorite guest.
favorite guest.
Favorite guest. Okay. So, one of the worst moments, and happens in live TV, is it was a Sunday night, and I was supposed to work 9 p.m. to midnight, and I was starting with a 1-hour cook show. And basically, I barely was 10, 15 minutes into the cook show. And this was way back. This was probably early 1990s. But anyway, I was selling this cookware set. They said there's a phone call, and the phone calls come from customers who have purchased. So I took the phone call, and it was a gentleman, and he was very nice. He seemed to know all about cooking, and he loved to cook, and he loved the cookware and all. And we got basically all done with our phone call. And I said, well, thank you so much for, calling in and talking to me. And he said, I just want to tell you one more thing. And so I learned to hate that.
That's dangerous. Yes. Say goodbye.
Because he said, I'm going to slit your throat.
Whoa.
I never imagined that was coming. I thought maybe a bad word was coming.
Right.
But I just I felt the blood drain out of my head. And then it was like I felt the anger coming up. And I looked into the camera. I'm still on camera. Now this all happens in a second or two. And I said, well, thank you very much. And all I could think of was, I have something in the oven. Let me turn away from the camera. And I headed to the oven to pull out the roast or whatever it was. I don't remember.
But in those few seconds, a million thoughts are running through your head. Like,
and then
what
I
is that?
started, right away, I was having trouble. And my producer said, let's wrap it up and go to commercials. And so we went to commercials, and I burst into tears.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
But I pulled it together in 30 seconds to 60 seconds. I went on and did the rest of my shift. And I just, talk about praying while I'm talking. I'm literally talking about a product. And in my head and my heart, I'm saying, please, Lord, just take this from me. Take this from me. I need to, I can't focus on it right now. And it was interesting because then a security guard, one of the QVC security guards, followed me home that night, walked around the outside of the house and everything. And of course, they had a system where if something comes in like that, they give it right to the FBI.
Yeah.
And then they told me later that evening that the phone call had come from Chicago, actually. And so I felt pretty safe at that point that, only 3 hours had gone by. He wasn't going to probably be flying to Philly that quickly. So anyway, but there were things like that probably were some of the worst moments that happened. I took a roast out of a big cooker, and they had given me, instead of 2 forks, they gave me 2 spatulas, and it rolled right off the spatulas, right onto the table, right onto the floor. Big prime rib. But those are funny moments. The kind of thing that oh my goodness. And then what can you do? The camera went right down onto the roast on the floor.
That's
Mary Beth
great.
helped me with the blooper DVD once, and believe me, we had a lot of bloopers every night.
That's great.
Those are the funny things that happen on live TV. Okay,
Yeah.
let me go to the best.
I know what it had to be.
I don't know if you'll know, but anyway.
A phone call from a close relative announcing
How do
something.
you know so much about me, Dan? It was right before Father's Day, and I was doing a show, and now I have to try to think of the reference of the verse for a moment. But anyway, okay, I'll think of it. So I was in the middle of my show. I don't know what I was selling. It was probably something for Father's Day. And again, they said, let's go to the phones. And so I said, hi, who's on the phone? And it was my dad. Now, my dad had been a pastor for 40 years and also very, just really, not like he was outgoing to a certain extent, but also kind of a quiet guy, he certainly didn't like to, be in the like on television or anything like that. And so it was my dad, and he wanted to, just say how proud he was of me. And then I'm trying to think of this verse. I had it on a plaque for so long, but basically it was all about that wanting to see your children walk in the truth. Do you guys remember that? I'm sorry that I can't think of it right now.
It's okay. I only memorized Jesus wept. So all the rest, you're still doing better.
Here it is. I have no greater joy than to see my children walk in the truth. The fact is that he quoted that verse on air, and it was just, I'll never forget that. And I remember saying, every decision I make, I ask myself two things. Would it bring honor to my earthly father? And would it bring honor to my heavenly Father?
Oh, that's good.
I like that.
And I still to this day think about that a lot of times when I'm making some decision, whether it's a quick decision or a thought out decision, because I don't know if I knew anybody closer to being Christ-like than my father.
And he was a pastor 40 years.
He was.
Wow. And where did you grow up, Mary Beth? Is in Minnesota, was it?
Yeah, Long Prairie, Minnesota, a little tiny town of 1,800 people.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So what about your favorite guest?
That's right, my favorite guest. Well, I was going to say, I know which phone call you were thinking of.
I was thinking of Eric.
Yeah, because at one point, my son Eric, after they were married, and by the way, their 10th wedding anniversary, Dan, is this Friday. Can you believe they've been married 10 years already?
10 years?
But,
wow.
Yeah.
And 3 kids, right?
Four.
4 kids. Wow. He didn't waste any time getting mom grandchildren.
That's exactly right. But I was on air in a kitchen show. I don't know what it is about those kitchen shows.
The kitchen gets you every time, right?
I took a phone call right at the end of the show, and it was my son, Eric, and he said, hi, Mom. And I was like, I couldn't figure out why in the world he was calling.
Yeah.
And then he said, well, we just called to tell you that you're going to be a grandmother. And of course, I burst into tears.
I love it.
That was great.
That's great.
And
That's
people
great.
still, to this day, and that was actually 7 years ago, because the twins, they had twin boys then. And the twin boys just turned 7 about 2 weeks ago. So 7 years ago. But anyway, best guest, favorite guest. Boy, there's so many good ones. I'll rattle off a few. When it came to jewelry, because I sold a lot of jewelry, I loved my friend Nolan Miller. And he was actually a dress designer who worked with Aaron Spelling out in Beverly Hills. And he had done the costumes for Green Acres, Love Boat, Dynasty, Beverly Hills 90210. And he was doing a line of jewelry for QVC. And we did get to work together for 20 years. And then he ended up passing away from lung cancer.
He was a very classy man, though, and a nice man.
a wonderful man. I had a chance to really talk to him about the Lord before he passed. And I don't know if he trusted Christ or not, but I wasn't letting him die without knowing and hearing about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Good
then
for you.
I loved Marie Osmond, working with her. I mean, obviously, she's still my friend. And we had a lot of good conversations because two women of faith, but different faiths.
Yes.
And so some very, poignant conversations about a lot of different things when it comes to faith. And then I would also have to say, one of the things that I love to do, and I think Dan probably knows this, but I got a chance to be on air with Bill Gaither 3 times.
Yeah.
We sold Bill Gaither CDs, and I remember sitting at the piano with him, and we were singing hymns. Now,
Nice.
this was again way back in the early 90s when, it was a lot more, what I want to say, acceptable to have spiritual things on the air. And so that was just really.
I think they must have put you and I on with him, because I had the same thing, sitting there harmonizing with Bill Gaither. I thought this was, and he's probably glad that we knew his songs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It was just amazing. I think of, what an amazing experience. And I got a chance to be on with Amy Grant, and I got a chance to also be on with Point of Grace, those girls who I just adored. And so to be able to have Christian musicians on like that is really special. But I have to tell you, Dan, this is one lady. I don't know if you've ever had her on, but she's phenomenal. Her name is Jennifer Rothschild.
No,
and
I've never had
she
her.
is a lady who she lost her sight at age 15. And so she's completely blind, but she has written books. She's a public speaker. And she came to our church a few years ago and just blew me off my feet. And so afterwards I went up to her, and her husband is her manager, and et cetera. So I had a conversation with them, and I said, listen, I want to do everything it takes to get you on QVC with your Bible studies, because she does Bible studies. And so I got a chance in the last year to have her on 3 times.
Wow.
Telling her Bible study on Psalms.
Oh, that's
Psalms
great.
23.
Yeah.
And just a phenomenal lady. And if you ever want me to get you in touch with her,
she'd make a great guest. Yeah.
Really?
You know, Mary Beth, I know you know my story. And when I was going through Beth's sickness, I would sit in the hospital many times and be exhausted. I felt like the Lord was just working on me, that it was time to go into ministry. And, that I knew that God would heal Beth one way or another, and he healed her. She's healed. She's in heaven. But I kind of knew, and I after the funeral, these 2 guys stayed for the whole week. I took them out on that Friday to the Bloomin' Onion place, Outback Steakhouse there in Malvern. And I told them, guys, the Lord's working on me, and I feel like I'm going to go into full-time ministry. I feel like I have to give QVC 2 more years because they've been so good to me. And they both looked at me and said, we want to help. I mean, I said, I'm in my 60s. I feel like I've done that much for God. And they both said, we'll come alongside you. These are great friends. And we thought that I would be speaking in a lot of churches. And I did some of that, but then COVID hit, and we never dreamed what God would do. But how did you know? Because it was hard to leave QVC for me, and I know for you, it was a wonderful job. And, people recognize you, and they're nice. You have so many opportunities. But how did you know it was time for sure?
I definitely was starting to get that feeling, and I was praying about it a lot, like all during 2023. And I knew that I would be, I was 60 or turning 64 in 2023. And I thought, well, I'm a little more than a year away from turning 65. And the other thing is, by that time, we had our 4 grandkids. And our son, Eric, is very busy. He is a man who's got his hands in a lot of different things. And
Yes, he does.
his wife, who I just adore, Alice, just loves the Lord with all her heart. But she really kept saying, I just need help. I just need help.
Mm.
And I started missing a few things that the boys were doing as they were in their Christian preschool because I had to work. And I thought, Lord, I missed so many things of my own kids. And I know they don't hold it against me. And I know I was doing what you wanted me to do, but I don't want to miss my grandkids' things. I really don't. I need, this is my do-over to help raise these children. And that's really what kind of got me started thinking about leaving. And just over praying about it and talking with Mark and just going through a lot of things. And in all honesty, just like all of the corporations across America over the last few years, it was starting to get more and more liberal. And it was starting to become a little bit less tolerant of some of the things that I believe. And so for that reason, I was just starting to feel like, Lord, is it time? And there was just no doubt in my mind right around Christmas of 2023, he was saying, I need you to give your notice, which is why I did it right away in January of 2024.
Yeah. So what is your future plans? You talked about the grandkids, but do you have any future plans? You also talked about part-time at QVC.
Yeah.
But do you have anything laid out that you think you want to do beyond that?
I really don't. Although I tell you, I really feel like God has something for me and I don't know what it is yet.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm totally okay with that. And I'm super excited about it. I don't know if he wants me more in women's ministry. For years and years, I've wanted to be part of a women's Bible study, and I just couldn't because my schedule is all over the place. And I wasn't going to commit to something that I couldn't, be committed to. And so I don't know if it's more women's ministry, if it's, I've even considered possibly teaching speech communications at the Christian school where my grandkids go to preschool, but teaching like the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. I just don't know what God has for me. I've thought maybe at some point I might want to write a book. I don't know. I'm not sure.
We talked about that today, and I said, I'm here to help.
Yeah.
That's an exciting place to be, isn't it?
Yeah. And more than anything, I just wanted to spend time with my husband. For 40, we've been married 42 years, but 38 of those years, I've been working 24/7 for the most part. When you're in live television, like we've been in at QVC, both Dan and I, it's weekends, it's holidays, it's overnights, it's everything. And he has been so sacrificial to, allow me to do that and to raise the kids and all of that, that I just feel like I owe him and our marriage time together.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times Beth and I would get to a barbecue, and after about 20 minutes, I'd say, well, I got to go. And they're like, where are you going? I go to work on a Saturday night? Yes.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, as we bring the podcast to a close, let me just ask you to share with our viewers what Jesus means to you. We know you have a strong faith and testimony. Share with our viewers your thoughts there.
Jesus is my everything. That is the absolute truth. And even at the young age of 7 years old in Sunday school, my teacher, Mrs. Kreider was her name, and she shared the gospel with us at 7 years old. And I knew then that I wanted Jesus part of my life. And I prayed to receive Christ and to commit my life to him. Now, at 7, I didn't understand it all. But I just knew, having watched my mom and my dad and my older brothers and sisters and their commitment to the Lord, I knew I wanted that. However, then at age 13, I started to really understand it more. And of course, I was in our church youth group, and we had Wednesday morning release time. And I mean, you were in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday morning, and Wednesday night, and then Saturdays for the fun times.
Yeah.
Don't forget choir practice.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But so when I was 17, I rededicated my life to the Lord, because at that time I really understood that this meant following him and not going my own way. And, you know, I look back and all the steps, and there's been a lot of hardships. You know, people just look at someone like me and think, wow, she just has it all. And she's just been so blessed. And I have. But there's been some really tough times too along the way. And, you know, to me, I am nothing without him. I am nothing. I can't do anything without him. I don't want to do anything without him. And, you know, it's like I think of the Lord as soon as I wake up in the morning, and I think about him throughout the day, and I talk to him throughout the day so many times. And at the same time, at night, before I go to sleep, I'm talking to the Lord, thanking him for the day that he's given to me. And I'm praying for each of my family members and even future wives and husbands, not only of my grandkids, but my own kids.
Mary Beth, it's interesting that you talked about going through tough times, because my final question for you, I wanted to ask you if you could, because there are people watching right now that are really going through hard times. Maybe they're losing hope.
Yeah.
What would you say to them? What do you think they should do?
Typically, if we are feeling hopeless and feeling like life is just completely letting us down, we try to fix it ourselves. We want to be in control. We want to try to do whatever we can do to fix it. And I can tell you right now, that doesn't work, because we are not God. And the best thing you can do, whether you are just struggling, you're frustrated, you're hopeless, whatever it might be, you have to start to pray to the Lord. And if you don't know him personally, then you need to cry out to him, and you need to admit you're a sinner. You need to believe that he died to save your life, died for your sins, rose again, as we're going to celebrate this Sunday. He is not dead. He is risen. He is as alive as anybody that you can imagine, and so much more. And if you cry out to him, he's listening. He's there to help you, and he will walk you through it. He will amaze you. He will absolutely amaze you. And it may not always be the answer you want. I always say God gives us one of three answers: yes, no, or I have a better idea. And
True.
I have a better idea.
Right. Yeah.
But that's what I would say, is that quit trying to do it yourself, because you can't.
Well, Mary Beth, our motto here is the title of the podcast, Finish Strong. We all want to finish strong for the Lord. I think too many people retire to doing nothing, and there's so many things we can do in retirement. I know the Lord has a lot in store for you. I know you're going to be ministering to people, and you already have tonight. So thank you for 38 years of friendship. Thank you for always being there for me. I love you.
I love you too, Danny. I think I'm the only one who can call you Danny.
Yeah, not many people can. But thanks, Mary Beth, and we wish you the best in the future. Terry, would you close in prayer for Mary Beth and close the podcast out here?
Sure. Father, we love you so much. What a great opportunity to get to share with Mary Beth and all of our listeners, Lord. And as we bring this podcast to a close, we just pray that those that are listening, God, will have received something that they can truly apply to their own lives tonight, that it'll minister to them, that it'll strengthen their walk with the Lord, that it'll give them a sense of understanding that they can't do things on their own, and that they need to leave it with the Lord And we lift up Mary Beth now as she's moving into a new season in life, God, that you would direct her path, that you would speak to her specifically and distinctly, Father, as she releases all of her skills and her talents and abilities to you, God, that you will find that perfect place, that perfect job, that perfect thing that you want to use her for to further your kingdom. So we believe it to be done, and we thank you in advance for the incredible things that you're going to do with Mary Beth's life, Lord. And we thank you that she is such a light in the darkness and a witness for others, God. And we ask that you bless her life and her family. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Terry and Brian and John in the background. Thank you so very, very much. This was such a pleasure, such a blessing to do this with you tonight.
Well, we hope you'll come back in the future and update us.
I will. I absolutely will.
We're going to put you what we call backstage, but don't go anywhere, okay? Okay.
Bye.
As we come. Thanks, Mary Beth. God bless. What a lady, huh? I told you, she just has so much inside of her. She loves
quality.
the Lord. Yeah. And so she's finishing strong, and we encourage you to do that. There's a lot to be done for the Lord. We thank you for listening, and I hope you'll tune in for the next episode of Finish Strong. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Finish Strong. For more information about Finish Strong and Fearless Faith, check out their website, ffaith.org. Make sure that you rate and review this podcast to help more people accomplish their God-given purpose so that together we can finish strong.